Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Dan. I'm the community engagement leader here at Pix Global. It's a pleasure to welcome everyone to our Trust Architecture webinar series. Through this series, we'll be exploring what trust architecture is, why it matters, and how it's transforming the way organizations collaborate and share information and data with each other. So again, thank you to everyone who's joined. We're excited to have an audience for these conversations. It's been nice. We're getting more and more people each week. Each session is designed to be interactive, so please make use of the chat and the question and answer features to ask questions and share your thoughts. On that note, these series are being recorded and published to reach a broader audience. And so as such, we're gathering all the answer questions and comments, and we address them at the completion of the half-hour presentation with a deep dive. We won't be sharing your contributions publicly unless you specifically ask and would like us to. So for ongoing discussion, resources, and to connect with other supply chain trust and transparency enthusiasts, we invite you to join our community of trust architects at chat.pix.io. So again, thank you for being here and for your commitment to advancing trust and transparency in your own organizations. Today's session will focus on understanding the United Nations Transparency Protocol, which we believe is the simplest tool for addressing complex supply chain challenges. And with that, we're excited to dive in with insights from Pix Global CEO, Zach Zeus. Let's get started.
Thanks, Dan, and welcome everybody. I'm going to go quickly through an agenda and then get into the overall information. So I'm going to first start with an overview around UNTP and Recommendation 49. And then I'm going to break down, sort of as Dan described, UNTP as the simplest way to address some of the challenges around transparency and trust in supply chains from three lenses, which is the policy and standards lens, the business lens, and the technology lens. And then after that, we'll open it up for discussion and questions and answers. So to start off, I want to kind of articulate what we mean when we say trust architecture and trust architects. And what our vision is that what we're doing at Pix Global and part of what we're doing with Recommendation 49 and UNTP, as well as other programs and platforms and tools that I'll talk about through the session, is we're architecting trust for a better world. And what we sort of articulate is that we envisage a future where the businesses, people, and communities that are most successful because they're making the world better. And a trust architect brings together the business, policy, and tech needs of an organization to create that future. And so going into the overview, what is UNTP? So first of all, UNTP is the implementation instrument of Recommendation 49, which is a recommendation that was actually adopted 2 weeks ago unanimously at the UN CFACT plenary by all of the heads of delegation that were present. And so Recommendation 49 is called Transparency at Scale, Fostering Sustainable Value Chains. We did do some sessions describing Recommendation 49 a couple of weeks ago. And so Recommendation 49 is the policy document, which is a recommendation to nations about eliminating greenwashing in trade. And the United Nations Transparency Protocol is the protocol to implement the policy. And what we're going to talk about today is that protocol and how it fits together. Just to reiterate, the adoption of Recommendation 49 2 weeks ago is a major milestone in the evolution and sort of the adoption of the United Nations Transparency Protocol and transparency at scale more broadly. And these recommendations are from UNCFACT are sometimes are part of kind of UNCFACT's role of creating digital trade standards and protocols to accelerate global trade and to simplify global trade. And so this whole ecosystem is around making that happen. Um, I'm going to kind of touch on kind of the 5 pillars of the protocol, and then as we go into more detail um, through the course of the discussion, hopefully these make more sense as we go through the process. Um, the core of the United Nations Transparency Protocol is the data that is exchanged via the protocol. And there's 2 key components, and those are the green boxes in the middle, and they're the digital product passports and the digital facility records. In addition to that, there's the traceability events and the conformity credentials that kind of build up what we describe as the transparency, traceability, and trust core of the United Nations Transparency Protocol. And so that's the core of it. But in order to get at that information or find that information, we need to be able to find the data. And so the core idea of the transparency protocol is to be, if you have a product, or if you have information, if you have the product, you can find more information about that product. Or if you know the facility the product was produced at, you can find out more information about that facility. And so that's done via this identity resolution piece, which gives the ability to scan a box or identify, look up the identifier of the facility and get more information about that product or facility. Underneath that is how you understand the data, how you bring that information together. So that's the key component of that is the sustainability vocabulary catalog. I'll talk about that in a little bit of a little while. And that's how you build together, how you make sense of the data that is shared via the identity resolution process. Now, whenever we're talking about data, there's kind of 2 other dimensions that I think are really important. One is how you secure the data and how you know the data is accurate and appropriate. And the other one is how you value the data. And we'll go into more of these as we go through the presentation. But those 5 pillars are the 5 pillars of the protocol. And while this is a complicated and busy slide, we think those 5 pillars create a framework for simplifying what is a complex ecosystem of trade and trade data and information and sustainability data and information as well. And so we think these pillars become a core simplifying architecture for solving the really complex supply chain and value chain ecosystem. Now, I know I say this is simplifying, and now I'm going to show an even more complicated slide, but what I'm going to point out as we go through those complicated slides is the simplification model, the repeating patterns that occurs over and over and over again in a supply chain. That means that that if we can simplify the exchange of information and simplify the process, that the pattern repeats. And one of the things we like to say, or we kind of remind ourselves is that any complex system is made up of any complex system that works is made up of simple systems that worked. And what we want to kind of highlight is that UNTP is a simple system for exchanging information between suppliers and buyers, so that supply chain transparency, traceability, and trust emerges. And so that's kind of what I'll kind of try and reinforce throughout this conversation. So the core thing that I want to kind of highlight around this slide is that if we have a product at any point in the supply chain, it's made from products upstream in that supply chain. And so if I have a product that's entering a market, it's made up from products that entered the market upstream from that product and made from additional products that were made. And so that pattern of products made from other products is repeated over and over again in a supply chain. And even when we get to raw materials or agricultural products, which are often the start of supply chains, they actually have upstream suppliers as well. So a farm product is made from seeds, and it's made from fertilizer, and it's made from water. So it even has upstream products to its value chain. And so this idea of collecting data from your upstream and sharing that, and basically manufacturing data manufacturing it and passing that downstream to your customers is the pattern that we sort of see repeating over and over again. And so basically, if we look here, we have raw materials here, process materials, component production, assembly, market placement, use, and repair and manufacture. This is kind of a generic value chain, but we can apply this generic value chain in each sector that we work in. And even a farming function or a food production function follows the same pattern. It's just the upstream is a little bit different. And each actor at this step in the value chain can publish information about that product, as well as publish information about the facility where that product was made. And the publishing of the data, the material data or the product data, or the publishing of the facility data, what we mean by these two things are, from our last slide, are digital product passports and digital facility records. So those two core green boxes in our architecture on the side. So the digital product passport and the digital facility record are published at each step of the supply chain so that people can get information about that downstream. And then credentials are the digital conformity credentials are the kinds of things that increase trust by trustworthy actors issuing them along the value chain as well. And so this pattern of conformity credentials linked to facility records through the value chain is what we is how the architecture, the protocol architecture, links to a generic value chain outcome. And then the final one is the traceability events is how we reflect how the stages of the life cycle, the raw materials, process materials, component production, and assembly get connected via the value chain. And so the traceability events is how you take a raw material and turn it into a finished product. And that is reflected in this sort of stages of life cycle process here. And so UNTP is a protocol architected to simplify solving the complex challenges of trade. And the key thing that I'm going to go through as we sort of break this down by business, policy and standards, and technical components is actually what are the simplification ideas that are underpinning UNTP. Because when we look at these complex value chains, it doesn't look simple. And every supply chain is complex. But what we're trying to identify are what are the architectural simplifications we can make via UNTP, or that UNTP makes, to actually make this an accessible challenge, a solvable problem to address. So we're going to start with the business side. So from a business perspective, the simplification concept from UNTP is to simplify sharing data with your customers. And so the key idea here is that you publish the digital product passports and the digital facility records with a standardized language and approach, which is the sustainability vocabulary catalog, that is discoverable by the value recipient, even if they're not the direct customer. And so basically, the connection between finding the data if you have the product to the digital product passport and the facility record in an understandable format is the core idea of simplifying the sharing of data with customers. And by standardizing the way in which information is shared between supplier to buyer is a core conceptual idea of UNTP and the core value proposition we think of this approach to solving that complex value chain challenge by simplifying the exchange of data between suppliers and buyers. The second concept that I think is important here is it's one thing to simplify the sharing of information, but how do you make the data you're sharing with your customers trustworthy? The key way we describe that is through the digital conformity credentials, which is the ability to provide third-party validation to the product, passports, or facility records that you're sharing so that people can trust the claims that you're making about the products. And then using that standardized language means that the connection between the claim that you're making in the product or facility record to the conformity credential is verifiable, is validatable by your customer or even their customer or their customer's customer. And because it's discoverable from the product passports, the identity or the facility records, because you can go from find the data and go through these elements, it becomes easier to validate that the information is trustworthy. When we get into the technical side, I'm going to talk a little bit about validation of trust graphs and how that kind of concept gets even more robust as you think about linked data throughout the value chain. And then the third concept from a value perspective is not only do you want to be able to validate the credentials of the information being shared, you also want to validate the entities that are the identities of the entities sharing the data. How trustworthy are the entities that are sharing the data? So if I'm getting a product passport from a company, I want to know, is that company the company that actually produced the product? And is it a company that is authorized to trade in that sort of economic environment? And so the third sort of component of the key conceptual idea is not only do we want to make sure that we get high quality information that is about products or facilities that we're getting information to, not only do we want to trust it because it has conformity, we want to make sure that the information that we're getting is validatable, that we can verify who that the identity of the entity sharing that information is in a digitally and robust way. And we do that by having a link between the product passport and the identity anchor. And so the core idea here is that if the core idea of a digital identity anchor is that if I'm a business in Australia, I have an Australian business number. And that business number comes on a PDF document today, but if that business number had a verifiable proof that I am the person who has been issued that business number, and I attach that verifiable proof to the product passports, and with a little bit of cryptographic magic, or magic's not the right word, with a little bit of cryptography, those two signatures can mean that the person that I share that product passport with can validate that I was actually the business that was issued that identity. That becomes a validation of the product passports that have been issued. And the core thing that I want to sort of articulate here is trust architects design the business cases for a better world. From a policy and standards perspective, the core idea here is that the core simplification concepts that I want to talk about next are how the policy and standards how meeting policy and standards are simplified using the UNTP model as well. And so there's three concepts that I'd like to talk about here too. And the first one is I mentioned the sustainability vocabulary catalog before and how that simplifies the understanding of claims and information. So by the first concept that I talked about was simplifying the exchange between supplier and buyer. The next concept here is how do we understand the language of the claims inside of those product passports or facility records? And how do we link the understanding of those claims to the conformity credential, that third-party audit that we get to validate those claims? And so the core idea here is that the sustainability vocabulary catalog provides an unambiguous key that I can link the claims in my product passport or facility record to the credentials that are issued by the auditor. And that sustainability vocabulary catalog means that that the claims and proof of the claims that I'm making in my product passport and facility records are validatable and understandable by my customer through defined information and vocabularies and information, so that there's no ambiguity about the claims that I'm making. And so basically it provides a scheme for vocabularies and a standard classification criteria so that no matter what organization I'm getting product passports or facility records from, I've got a consistent understanding of the data I'm getting from my upstream suppliers. And that consistent understanding means that I can pass that down to my buyers of my products or services in a consistent way as well. And so this sort of core understand the data component means that the claims and verifications about my products are also understandable for my customers. And by simplifying the understanding of those claims from that vocabulary catalog, that means that the upstream, this is a key value proposition to buyers. So as a producer of goods and services, what's important, one of the things I'm doing is simplifying how I share information with my buyers. The key concept here is that by simplifying my buyers' sustainability reporting, it means that there's value in the product passports and facility records that I'm passing down to my customer. And so the core idea here is that as sustainability reporting in corporates becomes increasingly relevant and important, if we can standardize how our products get plugged into that business, we can make it easier for them to do their sustainability reporting, which increases the value of our products to our customers. And then finally, as our customers are consuming our products, they want to have a simplified model for improving their due diligence. So one of the things that buyers are constantly faced with is how do they differentiate the products that they're buying from their upstream supply chain so that there's value for sustainability reporting. And the core idea here is what we describe as a trust graph. And so if we think about the digital product passport, linking the traceability events and the conformity credentials to the digital identity anchors, what we start seeing is that the item and the products over here, these items, products, batches, this is information about the products, have conformity claims and assessments are made at facilities. Each of these components have links to other credentials. And by following those links, you can build a graph of information that increases the trustworthiness of the claims that are being made and the value of those claims to a buyer. And what we have over here is the idea of validating the testing, the trust graph testing, so that you can improve due diligence by buyers algorithmically, which will again decrease the cost of proving the claims that you're making, and improve the value to customers downstream. So trust architects understand their ecosystems and realize value in those. The next side of sort of the simplification of UNTP that I want to talk about is the technical simplification. And so the tools we use to make this all work. And so I mentioned this before, but the core concept from a technical perspective is that if you have a thing, that you can get more information about that thing. And so the core sort of idea here is that if I have basically, as if we talk about digital product passports and facility records and conformity credentials being the core of UNTP publishing the data when we go back to our core architecture. And the key idea here is that the manufacturer or the supplier of the product publishes information about their product or facility to the identity of that product or facility. And basically, the conceptual model that we're sort of articulating is that every product, every facility in the marketplace basically will have a web page that lists all of the data about that product on that. And the identity resolution is how you kind of get back to that web page with all of the list of all of the information about that product or facility. And so as a supplier of products or a manufacturer, I can just publish data about my products, both securely and open. We'll talk about security in a second. And that information is discoverable via the identity of that facility or product. And so that discovery follows a similar pattern to how we discover websites and get more information via that way, but it's via the product identifier as opposed to a URL. Ensure that the data you receive is current and tamper resistant. And so one of the things we do talk about is verifiable credentials and distributed identifiers and digital identity anchors. And so the technical component of this is how do we make sure that the product is, or the data that we're getting is, has not been tampered with or not been changed or modified at any point as people have gone through the process. And we do that via verifiable credentials, which is basically an envelope around the data that's being sent, and the verifiable credentials are signed by the identity of the business that is publishing them. And so what that means is that you have this idea of immutability or no ability to change the information that sits inside of it, that sort of it's current and tamper resistant. And then you can put on top of that security layers and digital access control so that people, even though the fact that data is available about a product or a facility, that data isn't necessarily open if people don't want it to be open. And so what that means is you only share data if it adds value or that you secure it. And so there's two kinds of ways of sharing of the idea here is if you're a manufacturer of a product, you're only going to publish data about that product if it adds value to that product. You're not going to just publish everything about the product. And not only that, you might want to so as you're thinking about publishing that data, you may publish the data following the UNTP protocol, but you may secure it so that you can realize the value of sharing that data. And that security is something that we sort of articulate through the digital identity anchor and the digital access control components of the protocol. And so the core idea here is that trust architects leverage tools to accelerate the value. And the tools that we've talked about in UNTP are some of those technical tools through that process.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for joining. Dan, just back here as an impromptu host. We appreciate your time and engagement. We hope you found the session valuable. We encourage everyone to stay connected with us and our Trust Architect community at chat.pix.io. Come on in and let us know maybe some other topics you would like us to cover in future webinars. Look forward to seeing you next week, which we're going to cover how trust architects support business and getting started at scale. Until then, thank you everyone for joining us and for your commitment to building trust and transparency in the global supply chains.